Hi, my name is Brian Clark. I am a student at Arizona State University, and this training is on competence to stand trial. Today is September 11th, 2025. So, what we're going to discuss today is whether or not an individual who is in the criminal justice system, how they're determined to be competent to stand trial and whether the parameters, who does it, how is it done? So, the question is, how do you determine someone is competent to stand trial? And to determine whether a person is competent to stand trial, it is a very complex and detailed decision. Parents, Parturier, and excuse me if I butchered that, allows the state great latitude to make decisions for those who are unable to do so. One of the questions is when to allow someone to act on their own behalf and when to step in to take this right away to defend themselves and plead guilty at trial. The Western criminal justice system has always stood on being able to have the autonomy that is giving a person the ability to be able to, defend themselves at trial. And so, therefore, it takes a lot for them to step in. But, there's a compassionate side of it. As we see on the next slide, decisional competence. So, as far as the compassionate side of it, if it is clear that an individual is not able to defend themselves at trial, then someone will step in. So, the ability for a defendant to make a decision on their behalf is called decisional competence. It's been a pillar of our system since the mid 19th century. And there is, on one hand, the need for compassion and for the state to step in when one cannot defend themselves. However, there's also the need for a defendant to be able to make their own decisions, even if it is not in their best interest. And so one would argue that a decision to plead guilty is a little different than a decision to, defend yourself at trial, because when you defend yourself at trial, it takes into a whole different set of skill sets and things of that nature. And now we're going to get to the guilty plea. In order for a person to plead guilty, they must meet certain requirements. And as we'll see in the next slide, we'll get into some of those requirements. So, in order to plead guilty, the individual must be knowing, intelligent, and voluntary. So that gets into some of the stuff that we look at when you see those who may not be competent. They may plead guilty. You'll see in a lot of experiments that between 6 and 27% of people, even though they're not guilty, will plead guilty. And 90% of the guilty pleas come after, multiple hours of, interrogation by the police. And so that would, argue that a lot of times that those who have even pled guilty may not have been competent to do so, and that the police do use tactics, sometimes knowing that those will work because they wear them down with multiple hours of interrogation. How do you determine, if they understand what the charges are against them? Being able to determine what your charges are and how it affects you is significant. How do you determine if, what you're saying or doing now, will be the same, 10, 15, 20 years from now. You read in the chapter where the gentleman, he shot some people in saloon, shot his wife, decided that he was going to plead guilty, and that he fired his whole attorney staff, all of his counsel, because he said that they were going to, present items in his defense at trial. He didn't want to do that. And then, the judge asked me questions, and, he was allowed to, therefore plead guilty. The attorneys weren't allowed to present the evidence. However, the individual was under multiple different medications prescribed by a physician, and therefore that affected his decision making. I mean, he was depressed at the time. He was under the medication of all these people, and so of all these drugs, and so that makes you wonder, why is this individual, take under so much medication if they're competent, if they're okay, and they have sound decision making, and they're competent, why are they then given a whole litany of medications, and what were they for? And I don't feel that those questions were really answered. But again, when you have a judge making that decision, you have to question, as a judge, the person that should be making that decision. Is the judge the person that um is best fit to make that determination? And so there's some questions with that. And also, you're waiving rights when you're pleading. You're waiving rights. They understand the rights that they're waived, including a right to remain silent, right to a jury trial, among those other things. And so, having a jury trial, having the ability to defend yourself, is taken away by pleading guilty. So it's important to understand, that what you're giving up, and why they're giving it up. There is one case that I kind of linked in here, and we'll touch on a little bit. Is Mitchell Blair of Detroit, Michigan. She was accused of killing two of her children, placing their malnourished bodies in the freezer. She waived her right to a jury trial and pled guilty multiple times. She was sentenced to life in prison with no parole. And again, there were multiple times where she had angry outbursts, things of that nature. And one would argue, just on the basis of a mother killing two of her children, is that person sound? Is that person mentally sound? One would argue that that person is not mentally sound to be able to do that, in the first place. So, like, how can a mother kill two of her children and say, what, actually, I want to plead guilty? During the trial, she had multiple angry outbursts. You'll see in the video, that was the case. But again, they let her do that, and she ended up pleading guilty. So, one of the questions I have, knowing what you do about similar cases and the skill training expertise to defend yourself at trial, do you believe the same bar should be used to defend yourself at trial as it is to plead guilty? Pleading guilty is saying that, hey, I plead guilty to this crime. I did it. I know I did it. But is that, and that's one thing. But you know, being able to waive your ability to have an attorney present, that's a whole different skill set. I may be able to say, hey, I'm guilty, but even me right now, I'm working on my master's degree, and taking multiple courses in forensic psychology, criminal justice, and there's no way I would be able to defend myself at trial. Even some attorneys can't defend themselves at trial. Then they are attorneys because that's just not their expertise. If I'm convicted of a criminal offense, and I go to trial, I don't want a business attorney or a real estate attorney, and they won't take those cases either. I want a criminal attorney. I want someone who's experienced in this, and you can see that play out time and time again. So that's the question. You believe the same bar should be used to defend themselves at trial as it is to plead guilty? So again, my name is Brian Clark. I do appreciate you listening, and I hope you took something out of this. And I really enjoyed having these discussions with you. So thank you so much, and I really appreciate it.